we're gonna jump into like really leading with our best foot forward and make sure this is the part that everybody enjoys the most. Because that's what they say when you're doing content, you want to lead with the most exciting part to hook people in to watch. So we're gonna kick off with Wade reading our legal disclaimer.
Yes, bear with me. I'm going to do this in my best radio voice possible. And the content of this webinar and the views and opinions expressed by the participants and others are their own. They do not necessarily reflect the position or policy of REMAX Canada or its affiliates. Experiences of REMAX franchisees are varied and depend on many factors, including the skill, commitment, and capitalization of each individual franchisee and its agents. Your experience, if any, as a REMAX franchisee may differ materially from those expressed in this webinar. Please consult your own legal or financial experts. This webinar is not intended as an offer to sell or a solicitation or any offer to buy a REMAX franchise. It is intended solely for the real estate agents and sales associates. A franchise is offered in many jurisdictions in Canada only by delivery of a franchise disclosure document to you in compliance with applicable franchise sales laws. This webinar is for informational purposes only and is not intended and does not supplement or otherwise modify the content of any franchise disclosure document that has been or may be provided to you. Further, if you are currently affiliated with any or with another franchise, or this material is not intended as an offer to offer a REMAX franchise or to solicit or change in affiliation. And I'm not reading the address. Andrew, how did I do? I got through it.
You
We all
nailed it.
survived. Did
Everyone
the
is like
attendance
edge of
just
their
dip
seat.
down like crazy?
Yeah, we actually
Hopefully
went
not.
up. So you're
Oh,
good.
good, good, good. Whew.
So
All
we can
right.
actually take that off the screen and we are good. Just the one note before we dive right in. For us, for just making ourselves easier to track questions and things like that, there is the Q&A box. Please put questions through the Q&A because I'll be able to track it better and we'll try and get a chance. Like we do have a lot of questions we want to go through. But if you use the chat, I will try to pay attention to it, but if it's going quickly, I may not be able to catch all your questions where they kind of get stored a little bit easier for us on the Q&A side. So questions in the Q&A, chat in the chat. Otherwise, while we're kicking off, let us know where you're from in the chat because I'm always looking forward to seeing where people come from when we do these webinars. I see a lot of names I recognize, so I think we have people coast to coast, which is fun. But before we dive into the first question, we're gonna make everyone introduce themselves because that's way more exciting than having me read the bios or anything. Because, well, I'm just not great at reading like that. So we're gonna start with Chris. Get to introduce yourself. The elevator pitch for those who don't know you.
Yeah, Christopher Alexander. I think many of you know me from my former role, but now a REMAX broker owner in Muskoka and Halliburton County. I've been licensed sales associate for over 15 years.
Awesome. And Faisal.
Hi, I'm Faisal Susiwala from Cambridge, Ontario with REMAX Twin City. I have been with REMAX for 33 years and in the business for 38 years. Nice to see you all.
And Tanya.
I'm Tanya Eklund from Calgary, Alberta, and I have been with the REMAX franchise since the beginning of my career, which will be 25 years in this August.
Awesome. And the first question's already come in. Yes, we will send a copy of this recording to everyone when this jumps off. And then wait, I mean, we can't forget you. You did such a good job. We have to give you a second to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, excited to be co-hosting this with you, Andrew. My name's Wade Paterson. I'm an executive director with REMAX Canada. Been with REMAX for about a decade.
Awesome. So we're gonna start just keep it simple, kind of get to know where everyone got started, and then we'll kind of dive more into how you've kind of built up to where you are. So again, we'll start with Tanya this time. How did you get into real estate?
Well, I was attending the University of Alberta. I grew up in rural Alberta outside of a small town called Wetaskiwin. There's a little jingle. It's cars cost less than Wetaskiwin, if you haven't heard it. And went to university and realized that academia may not be for me. And so I dropped out. And my best friend from high school at the time was dating a brother to a realtor down here who dropped out of high school, made a six-figure income, and said, Tanya, you should come and meet me. And so I drove up here to meet him, and I dropped out of university 3 weeks later, and that was in August of 2000. And I thought I might go back and finish a degree, but I never did. And here we are today.
You can always go back. Making it work right now. And how about you, Faisal? How'd you get started?
Well, I was a very impressionable 17-year-old watching late night television one night, and an infomercial comes on with a um, Vietnamese gentleman sitting on the back of a yacht surrounded by beautiful women, showing his Rolls Royce and the mansions he's been buying and flipping. And I thought, I want to be this guy. So, how do I learn about real estate? So, I actually got into real estate by mistake because I couldn't afford the course he was selling, but I looked up the local community college to see if they had any real estate courses, not even knowing that it was a licensing course. I registered that summer while I was still 17 at the time. I had to wait till I was 18 to actually get my license, and the rest is history. I've been doing it since 1988.
Have you met the guy from the video yet?
No, he did some time though. Yes, I'm glad I didn't get his course because it would have taught me what not to do.
Take a slightly different route, then in a good way.
True.
That's good. How about you, Chris?
Well, it was a family business, but I didn't realize I wanted to get into real estate until I was in university and realized that to make a good living, I was going to have to do a lot more education, which I hated. So I started taking my courses while I was finishing school. And about 6 months after I graduated, I got my license and was off to the races.
That's awesome. Great intro stories from each of you. And what I'm curious about, so all three of you have done a great job with successful careers accumulating wealth, but I'm wondering if we could go back to the early days where maybe it was a little bit scrappy. Faisal, you told the story of, taking the course and seeing that this lifestyle was happening. Do you remember like that first leap to maybe attaining your first investment property? Like what went into that? How were you able to take that first step?
So in the very beginning, I had no money whatsoever. In fact, I didn't even have a car. I was borrowing my mom's car in between classes to go show homes. I was at a fundraising dinner and I met some investors from South Africa who wanted to invest some money. I had two choices. They asked me, what do I do? I could have said I'm a high school kid, or I could have said I'm a realtor. So I said I'm a realtor, gave them my card, which I had printed myself, and they happened to call on the Monday and said, we're going to be in your area, show us some properties. They happened to come down that week, and I asked my broker to help me understand what I'm supposed to be doing here. And he did, and he was a very kind man. And they said, okay, we're going to buy this rental property. It was a commercial building with some residential units above. And they said, under the condition that because we are not Canadian, we need a partner who is Canadian. We need you to partner with us. And that was just organically the first opportunity I ever had to invest money was by force, really, because if I wanted to make this deal, I need to partner with these guys. My commission was 3%. I borrowed the balance of the 2%, and I became a 5% owner of this commercial building with these folks back in 1989. And that got me started. But it also taught me a very important lesson that sometimes if you can't do it on your own, partnering and creating partnerships sometimes is the answer to get started until such time that you can start doing it on your own. But partnering with the right people is very important as well.
Tanya, how about for you? When were you able to kind of take that first step beyond, okay, getting your footing as an agent, and now you're able to actually get into perhaps your first investment property?
Well, it was a really funny story. I started when I was 20, and when I was 23, I thought I wanted to buy my first investment property. And so I was looking for a condo. At the time, I would have been 23 years old in 2003. And so I had 5% down payment as a first home buyer. And I guess to be fair, it would have been an investment, but also something that I lived in. And so I had 5% down, and I found this condo that I was going to buy. And then around the same time, I was driving through an inner city community, and I pulled up because this gentleman had just put up the sandwich board that said just listed. And I got out and I said, "Oh, are you listing this?" And he said, "Yes, I'm the owner and I'm licensed as well. My name is Ross." And I said, "Hi, Ross." And I said, "How much are you asking?" And he said, 299,000. And I said, "Oh," I said, "it's way above my budget. I'm only pre-approved for 185." And that was my dad co-signing for me because I had only been in real estate for 3 years and not making a ton of money yet on the books anyways. And so he said, "Well, why don't you come in and take a look? It's on a 50 by 120 lot, which if you live in Calgary, that's very valuable, subdividable lot." And he had gutted this bungalow to the studs and he had put a suite in the basement. And so he was trying to sell me on, "Well, you can rent out the suite." So long story short, I said, "I can't afford the down payment." And he said, "Well, you seem like a really nice person." He's like, "Why don't you think about it? And if it's something you're interested in, maybe we can come up with a loan payment for the down payment." So I called Ross the next day and I said, "Ross, I'm interested. What are you thinking?" And he said, "Well, I've made a couple calls about you to someone in your brokerage." And he said, "It sounds like you're a really hard worker." He said, "Why don't I lend you half of the down payment that you need for 6 months interest free? And after the 6 months, if you don't pay me back, I'm going to start charging you interest." Is this a trick? So I did the deal. I paid 291,000 for it. I negotiated 9,000 off. And I owned that property until 2015 when I sold it to a developer. That was the first property that I bought.
Wow, love that story. And then Chris, same question for you as well. And it's interesting we had a call last week talking about this discussion and you had actually said, this is something I wish I got into even earlier, but I'm curious for you, what was your first foray into an investment property?
Well, part of it kind of happened by osmosis. So I bought my first condo when I was 24, and then I met my wife, and we started renting out my place. She lived about a 5-minute walk from me in another unit, so we moved into her place and started renting mine. And that kind of got my feet wet into kind of managing a secondary property. But most of the investing I was doing was RSPs, some stocks here and there. But it really wasn't until 2020 that I started to buy a lot of different property types. So, some residential units, commercial buildings. And so I think in 2020, we there was 3 or 4 different properties that we had acquired in that year. And that was a lot to bite off at one time. I had to set up all these different corporations as well for the various types of dwellings, and it was a lot to take on all at once. But now that I've kind of got the hang of it, like I said, I wish I started a lot sooner because it was always a scary plunge to take.
Now, I'm curious, this is maybe a question for all three of you, I guess. We'll start with Tanya. Is like when you're looking at investing into real estate, because all of it, like you're successful in like your main business, which is being a realtor, selling, and that side of things. When you look at getting into investing, because that takes time and attention away from being a realtor, like if you could go back, talk to yourself back then, like when would you say like is the right time to make that jump from I'm focusing kind of all my time into growing that side of the business versus now getting into investing?
Well, I think it comes down to your cash flow and your liquidity, and how much you can leverage that. And I am more of a conservative investor in some aspects, and I have more of a riskier portfolio in other aspects. And so I think having that diversity, I think it's saving and putting some away. And as soon as you have a down payment for something, why wait? But again, the conservative part of me always is, okay, I have to have this much of a nest egg over here, because if I go and buy, say when I'm first starting and maybe in the first 5 years, I go and buy another property and I need, $100,000 or $50,000 down payment. I have to look at what I need to live and what I need to survive. And so I think there is a little bit of a balance, and that's where some people maybe get into trouble, is they invest too much in a shorter period of time. And so I think it's just having, really wise people around you that can help guide you and look at your finances and say, okay, I think you're good to buy another property or invest in this.
Is there any like specific advice you got from mentors for yourself early on that's like still resonates with you?
That's a really great question, Andrew. I had two gentlemen in my life. They were called my gray-haired advisors, and I'd meet for lunch with them at this Italian restaurant downtown every other Friday. And I think that they, like, when I would run business things past them, they would always just be very encouraging of me. And I think even growing up in my home, I always had support and people that believed in me. So I think that that is where my confidence came up from with investing. I never had people that said, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. They asked me a lot of questions like, well, how do you feel about this, Tanya? And what does your gut tell you? And what is the cash flow on this? And what is the current interest rate? But I always had people that were extremely encouraging in my life. And so I think that that's really was the platform for me taking some risks.
And how about you, Faisal? Like, when do you like make that jump from I'm focusing all my effort into selling versus getting into the investing side for you?
Well, for me, as I said, it was very early on that I was sort of forced into that investment. But
Yeah.
what I learned from that is start early, partner if necessary, have skin in the game because that is so important when you're selling real estate and you want to have different facets to your business, to have a situation where you can help people buy, help people sell, help people invest. That is important. And when you're saying to someone that, look, I have my own money in this. I'm representing this site, but I'm also investing. Or when somebody asks me, well, what do you do as far as investments? And I'm saying, well, I'm buying resale homes or I'm flipping properties. So when you're able to become relatable by showing them that you yourself are doing exactly what you're suggesting that they do. And again, I wasn't really advertising the fact that I could help people invest and whatnot. It happened organically where people would say, hey, we kind of see you're around, it looks like you've got some tenants or we were talking to somebody. What have you been doing? And then I started approaching my database of my clients that I had just worked with to say, here's what I'm doing. If you'd like to learn about investing and leveraging your assets to deploy some of that and start building wealth in that way, apart from investing in mutual funds and RSPs and all of that, the diversification is very important. But here's an area that most people were not investing in because they were afraid of tenants, they were afraid of property management. And when I was able to offer solutions to them early on, it just helped me build up another aspect of my business that helped fuel my own investment journey. And I was always looking at my career as how can I earn income here so that I can deploy it or a percentage of it into real estate so I can create wealth building in real estate as opposed to just buying and selling.
And a similar vein, I'm curious for you especially, how do you decide to like allocate your time across kind of the different focuses that you have there? Because obviously, where you spend the most time obviously gets the most attention is going to kind of grow faster. So like, how do you decide to like allocate your time across the different things that you're doing?
My focus is always on representing my clients for buying and selling and those who want to invest. But I have a great team of assistants. They're not licensed, they're not agents that handle my property management side, that handle the rent collection side, the accounting side of it, the whatever is required, it's delegation. And when you can delegate properly, it doesn't become overwhelming and you're able to grow a lot faster. And a lot of people have trouble delegating because they think about the cost involved. But when you look at the big picture, that's where you can get the greatest amount of gain is by having people do what they're very good at because you can't be good at everything.
Curious for you too, Chris, because like obviously being president of REMAX Canada for a while, plus you had the brokerage and you're getting into investing, like how were you able to kind of like focus your time across all the different things that you're doing?
Like Faisal had really good assistants. Um, yeah, it it can be a full-time job managing properties from afar. And, I'm just thinking of property that I share with my sisters in the US. Like that's a constant, needs constant attention. But, property managers is great. And, I work with Faisal on several different properties and I don't have to think about anything. It's great. I just, I pay my annual fee, and when there's an issue, you have to, that it gets handled. But yeah, I mean, it can be overwhelming. My wife has a investment property that she manages. They have a small business, so they're super busy. They don't have a property manager. Every time something breaks, they're running out there dealing with it. They had a tenant that was subleasing to like 7 people. Um, Without permission, and that was like it takes so much time, but I don't know, she likes to handle the nitty-gritty, I guess. But when you're super busy, and you're involved in other businesses, delegating in property managers would be my advice.
Faisal, within your book, you have this concept of monetizing your license, and you have other aspects like the 20% rule and things like that. But can you kind of break down further? What is that concept? What does that mean to monetize your license?
My so apart from buying, selling, helping people invest, leasing properties, but the property management aspect of it is a huge part of how I've been able to monetize my license because by becoming a property manager, it's a retention model. So when you're helping that landlord lease out their property, you're now involved in their journey of investment, as opposed to handing them off to a property manager and say, here, you just take care of it. And a lot of realtors fall into that trap of, you know what, I don't get that. Leasing is too time consuming. I'm not going to spend my time for, $1,800 commission on renting out a property. But the big picture here is, you are not staying involved with that landlord if you're not managing their properties. And yes, we charge a fee for it, and the fee just covers our overhead and covers our property management manager's salary and whatnot. But more importantly, when they think about selling that property 3, 5, 7 years down the road, they're going to ask the person that was involved in their management. And that's one way of monetizing, but also monetizing your license by creating opportunities. We are out there each day seeing the opportunities, especially right now. In downturns, I find the greatest opportunities. And to be able to partner with developers, builders, people who just want to, acquire land. These are the times that you can use that and use your skills and your license to create partnerships and grow your portfolio along with theirs. So there's so many different facets, and I get into different things about how to monetize in my book as well. But that's just one aspect of it.
Mm. And then Tanya, for you, I know diversification's been a key piece. And from things like lending to VC deals to other investments, why has that been an important pillar for you in your career?
Well, I think Wade, it's kind of one of those, like, I call myself sometimes an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't mean to get into real estate. I didn't mean to start a lending company. I didn't mean to start investing in real estate or VC deals. And so I've really just surrounded myself by really great people. And it's that old adage, you are the average of the top 5 people you surround yourself with. And so I've always really encouraged relationships with people that are a lot smarter than I am, that have, MBAs and lots of companies. And so they've really kind of brought me into their fold. And I've just had opportunities kind of fall into my lap. Even my first lending deal, it was a client that I had sold a house to that he tore down, and he had maybe champagne taste on a beer budget, and RBC wouldn't give him 375,000 more to finish his house. And so he said, "Hey, Tanya, do you ever deal with private lenders? Would you be able to connect me?" And I said, "Well, what do you need?" And he said, "Well, I need 375,000 because this house is costing me more and RBC won't give me more money." And I said, "Well, how long do you need it for?" And he says, "Probably 8 months." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Let me think about that." So I leave and I call my friend that owns a lending company and I said, "What do you think about this?" And he said, 12 to 13%, 2% upfront fee, 8 months. And that was my very first lending deal. I think that was probably 8 or 9 years ago. And then it just spiraled from there. And now I do loans up to 2 years for small businesses, not just bridge financing. And so it just kind of, again, fell into my lap by having conversations with people and asking questions.
Hmm. And Chris, earlier on, you were talking a little bit about you getting into some real estate investments and how you started with maybe some other areas like stocks and that piece. What's your thoughts on diversification? Like, what does that look like? How do you get the right mix of an investment portfolio where you have diversification happening?
Well, the whole point of diversifying is that when one part of your portfolio is down, hopefully the others are up. And you can weather storms. And I've been very real estate heavy up until about 2 years ago. And before that I was very stock heavy. And so now I'm trying to balance things out. And as Faisal said, there's great opportunities pretty much across the country right now, even in the US, if you can make that work. I mean, there's parts of Ohio where you can buy um, detached units for 150,000 and they rent for $200 to $2,500 a month. So, there is a lot of opportunity in other places, but I think just learning from people who have done it before me, Faisal, you've been a big help for me too, so thank you. My sister, other successful entrepreneurs I've surrounded myself with have given me a lot of great insights, and a lot of it can be trial and error too. And I think what's really important in any investing you do, you have to be able to weather storms. And so be really careful not to overextend yourself in anything because stuff happens. You might need to liquidate if it's a stock or something breaks down in a property that you own that's being leased, or the tenant leaves and you have no income, or God forbid you're being held hostage by a tenant that won't leave and isn't paying. So as long as you can weather those storms and be able to fight through some of adversity, chances are, if you're in it for the long run, you're going to do very well.
And that just segues.
Wade, oh, Andrew, I just
No,
have
go ahead.
a whole fire crew outside of my house. So I'm just going to mute myself for a minute, stick my head out the door, and come back.
Everything
Yeah,
okay?
be safe, more important.
Yikes.
So that does segue nicely into kind of what I was saying, because a lot of times when people talk about investing in real estate, everyone's always success this, success that, but a lot of lessons come from like very hard learned lessons. So when you're thinking back over, things that you've done, what like do any of these like hard earned lessons really stand out for you over the course of time? Maybe start with you, Faisal.
Yeah, so again, very early on in my career, and thank goodness it was very early on in my career. And I write about this in my book. At the age of 19, I had to file bankruptcy. And the reason I had to file bankruptcy was in 88, 89, things were starting to do well. But later in 89, we hit this recession. And that recession lasted for about 10 years. But the same building that I had invested, just 5% ownership, with the group from South Africa, became vacant. So the very important lesson that I learned very early on in my career is only invest in something that you can continue to feed and fuel, even if the entire building is vacant. And we got caught in that situation where commercial tenants moved out. There were some government tenants that lost funding. They moved out. The residential tenants stopped paying rent. We had assumed those tenants. And really, I had a couple of choices. I could keep making money calls to my partners and say, keep feeding this. But property prices, we are concerned about 18 to 20% drops right now. Property prices had dropped 50% in 1990. And imagine, paying $750,000 for a building that's now worth $375,000 or $350,000. People were just mailing in their keys, getting out of stuff. And the options there were we could stop the bleeding by filing bankruptcy. And that's exactly what I ended up doing in that time. And the important lesson there was that I didn't have the funding behind me to sustain the vacancies. So that's the most important lesson today. Even when I purchase something, I buy it as if it's vacant. And can I still afford to keep running this property with vacancies? And again, just like Chris said, like he's looking at, can I handle this if there's no tenant there or somebody stops paying my rent?
Tanya, everything's good? No fire?
Nope.
Good. So the question that we were asking was like thinking back, like what are some like hard learned lessons? Because like everyone's always talking about their success when they're getting into investing, and very few kind of focus on like what are those hard learned lessons during the journey. So like for you, do any stand out along the way?
Yeah, I think it's you, for me, it's been not investing what I can't afford to lose. And so that would be number one principle. Number two is many years ago, I was listening to Kevin O'Leary, and he had spoke at a real estate conference. And he said that the best piece of advice was what his mother told him. And that if he has the ability to invest his own money and really understand the investment, then giving your money to somebody else to invest maybe isn't the best idea. And so I was, you know, fairly heavily invested into the stock market. I have no conception of stocks. I mean, I understand the basics, but as far as, you know, doing my own investing, I have no idea. I had a stockbroker. He was doing okay for me at the time. And I thought, well, it was around the time I started my lending company. And I thought, well, I'm giving my money to someone really blindly when I don't really understand, you know, what they're doing with my money. And so I pulled all this money out, and that is how I actually started after I did this first lending deal. That's how I continued to funnel my lending deals. And so I really ran with that philosophy for probably about 10 years. And then I thought, okay, it's time maybe that I do kind of reinvest in some stocks. But that was a really big kind of conversation to have with myself. And I was really happy that I kind of took the ball by the horns and started investing my own money. And then I couldn't be upset with anyone if I lost it because it would have just been on me.
Yeah, it's the right approach. How about you, Chris? Any like hard learned lessons along the way?
Yeah, don't get caught up emotionally. When it's investing, it's all about the numbers. And I'm thinking of a building that I own right now that I paid way too much for because I got caught up emotionally. And, you know, I'm gonna have to sit that out for probably another 15 to 20 years. Hopefully not, but that's what I'm thinking in my mind is, you know, it cash flows really well. So once it's paid off, it'll be worth it. But, you know, getting caught up in the emotion on a transactional deal, it's not like you're buying a home where you want to raise your family. Um, it's really about the numbers, the dollars and cents, and if they don't make sense, walk away.
Talking about some of those hard lessons learned, I think this ties in nicely to just mindset. And I want to ask each of you a couple questions about that. First off, Faisal, you were on another podcast and you were talking about this mantra that has guided you throughout your whole career of doing the right thing. And I would only imagine when it comes to wealth opportunities, there's probably short-term opportunities, which maybe are sometimes on the borderline versus playing the longer game. And so I'm curious, how has that mantra of doing the right thing served you well when it comes to wealth accumulation?
You know, and my mentor was Mr. Maneri. He was 74 years old, who hired an 18-year-old kid. And the first thing he said to me is don't chase the money, do the right thing, do a good job, the money will come. And that taught me not to look for that instant gratification, to really just invest my time and my heart into it. More than mindset, it was heart set.
Mm.
Does this feel right? Am I giving the right advice? Am I knowingly doing something that I shouldn't be doing? And that just started to build me up as a young person, as a human being, as doing good all the time. First of all, good is just worth doing. So why not continue to do it? But it also showed a genuine care to the people that I was working with. If I walked through a home or if I showed a property to someone and I didn't think it was good for them, I wouldn't wait for them to point out the flaws. I would point it out to them. And that just, again, helped gain that trust and loyalty from those folks. So, it took 10 years before I started to really reap the benefits. But when that started happening, I wasn't picking up the phone. I wasn't cold calling. I wasn't door knocking. The calls were coming in to me. And I feel very blessed that that was an important early life lesson that Mr. Maneri had shared with me. And to this day, I still live by that.
Tanya, about 4 years ago, I had the chance to interview you on the then REMAX Hustle podcast. And one of the things I remember from that conversation was that you were talking about your upbringing and the fact that you never really were told that you couldn't do something. Like essentially, you were raised in this environment where anything is possible. And I'm curious how that mindset, anything is possible, has helped you when it comes to wealth.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, I don't want to say poor, but I didn't grow up rich. I grew up in a rural community and I didn't know what it was like to have money. But I always had, and still to this day, have extremely supportive parents. I mean, so much that when I dropped out of university, they said, well, as long as you're happy, Tanya, like we believe in you. And if real estate is something that you want to try, then go for it. And so I never had anyone telling me that I couldn't do it or that I shouldn't do it. They just wanted the best for me. And I think they knew that I was really hardworking and tenacious, and they just always believed in me. And so I think that was kind of the catalyst in my success, because no one ever told me that I couldn't do well, except one guy in my brokerage when I first got to Remax. And he said, how much do you want to make your first year? And I said, I want to make 100 to 110,000. And he said, oh, you'll never make that. Like, I don't even make that. And I've been in real estate for 11 years. And so that was actually one of the catalysts in me really wanting to do well. And I did. I made over 100,000 in my first year. That was back in 2000. And then about 14 years later, that same gentleman asked to join my team. So that was a very, very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I find that funny. Someone who has won the Luminary of Distinction within Remax being told that they wouldn't be able to earn 100,000. Good for you, Tanya. And Chris, a question for you on mindset. You posted a video to Instagram recently, and it was talking about 4 traits that have really guided you, and it was specifically on leadership. But I'm curious if there's a crossover here when it comes to wealth accumulation as well. And so those 4 traits were curiosity, positivity, surrounding yourself with successful people, and trusting in the expertise of others. Is there any tie in there?
Well, yeah, I mean, 3 and 4 especially, you know, just being surrounded by really successful entrepreneurs, Walter Schneider specifically, built an empire through investments, a lot of it real estate wise. Um, and admittedly, I was really nervous to put money towards, even when the market was really hot. The thought of carrying a property, if something went wrong, like a tenant moved out, was really scary. And sometimes you also need to just jump in, but make sure you have good, trusted advice of people. I mean, I always like to share this story, Faisal, but like the first property I bought through him, I still haven't seen it. And Faisal said to me when I was buying it, actually, I think I went out to the site. I did go to the site with you, but I trusted you, and you were like, "Well, have you ever bought swamp water in Florida?" Uh, but we had a very trusting relationship with him. Candidly, my sister Leah handles a lot of my property investments as well that she's involved in. Thank God for her. And so, yeah, those surrounding yourself with smart people and trusting the expertise of, I mean, after all, we're professionals in what we do, and people trust us every day to help them buy and sell homes. It's no different when you're trying to build your own wealth. Like there are people that are better at it than you, and taking that advice with obvious, caution. You can't just be blind in everything, but it will really help fast track your success.
Which I think kind of leads nicely into the next question. We'll start with Faisal. Like when you think about like surrounding yourself with really smart people, like I've seen in the industry a lot, and I know we've only recently met, but like you end up at a lot of like REMAX conferences and different events over the years. Like, how do you find that kind of helps contribute to the success that you've had with the investing side of the business?
I call it reverse mentoring. I mentor a lot of agents. I coach agents as well, but I learn from their experiences. And you can get to a certain point in your career where you become desensitized to the struggles of each day, and just listening to their stories, it just helps me recalibrate. And I'm learning each day on, opportunities like what Chris said right now. I had no idea you could buy a property in Ohio for that kind of money. And so we'll be making a trip to Ohio soon, hopefully, Chris.
Yeah.
But this is great to learn from people who are doing various different things, and then take their experiences and adapt that into your own life as well. One of the things that I was told very early on in my career is that your goal should be that your career income should equal or be more than your assets should be more than your career income. So if you make X amount of dollars in your lifetime, your assets should be that or more. So if you made $10 million in your career, you should own $10 million worth of real estate assets. And that stuck with me very early on. And I've always sort of worked with it. So you take your net worth, you divide it by your lifetime income, it should be one or greater. So that's a little exercise you can do after this webinar and see where you are on that chart.
Awesome. All right. We do have a question. What about buying outside of Canada and the US? Like, do any of you have experience investing in other countries, or just thoughts on that in general? Maybe start with Chris.
I don't own anything personally overseas, or in South America. I think the world is getting a lot smaller. A lot of people are investing in Mexico. I think in that case, just to tie into what Tanya was talking about earlier, like if you're gonna invest in any place, even in your own backyard, like do the work, understand what you're buying, make sure that the people you're buying from are reputable or buying through. And if you're thinking of buying a property outside of the US and Canada, make sure you're doing your due diligence, because so much can go wrong and you're far away. And so that trust element and due diligence is so crucial.
And then Faisal, Tanya, do either of you have experience outside of kind of Canada and the US?
I do not. I've always tried to keep it pretty compact, scaled it down to just sort of my region. Just easier from a management perspective. I haven't had any options as far as people like Chris said that you can trust and say, I trust these people to invest the money. And like I like transparency when I'm investing as well. And sometimes you don't get that if you don't know who you're dealing with.
How are you, Tanya?
Yeah, I'm just in North America. That's it. And I think even in there, like as a Canadian, parts of the US, specifically California and Hawaii, you have to look, they have the highest estate tax. When Chad and I first even looked at, buying property in the US, being a Canadian citizen, those are the two reasons we didn't buy, even though we go to Maui a lot. We ended up buying in Arizona. We've owned several properties there over 15 years and are invested in those areas. Invested in Arizona, but we wanted to buy in a state that we could see ourselves retiring in someday. But we didn't have to, we looked at, well, what is the tax like? So I think that if you are even buying within North America, if you're a Canadian citizen versus US citizen, what are those tax implications?
Yeah, and stability of a country is so important too. I feel most comfortable in the US and Canada because we have, stable banking systems. But the other great thing about investing in the US is like you get US income. And by and large, there's a lot of markets in the US that are a fraction of the cost in Canada. And so it's a lot different. There's, as Tanya mentioned, there's way different tax implications. And so you've got to do a lot more homework, but having a little pot of US income at the end of every year really helps, especially on holidays.
One of the questions Andrew had asked earlier to you, Faisal, was a little bit about like events and maybe how that ties in. And I'm curious, like Faisal, Tanya, both of you especially, I can only imagine there's probably competitors knocking at the door all the time for both of you trying to recruit and that kind of thing. Yet both of you have remained with REMAX for the last couple of decades. And so being with REMAX specifically, has that aided in everything that we're talking about today? Faisal, I'll start with you for this.
Well, especially when I was starting out, to be a part of Remax was very intimidating. I'm talking 35 years ago, because only the perception was only top producers were there, that you had to be someone to be at Remax because the way the structure worked. Fortunately, I met Bob Stevens, who's been with Remax for many many years, and him and his wife Louise invited me to work with them, and what I learned was I'm not the top agent in the city, but Remax was the top company in the city. And it was validation for me to align myself with the number one brand at the time and still is today. And what I learned over the years is I was able to leverage that brand to become top of mind recall. So it didn't matter if somebody was in Africa or India or Egypt, they would see the billboard of Remax or the marketing of Remax in any country in the world and immediately relate that back to me. So all the marketing that I was doing locally was continuing to sort of subconsciously live in people's minds. So they would say, "Oh, that's Faisal's company." And I would get people actually taking pictures when they're abroad saying, "Oh, we just drove by and we saw your sign." Well,
Wow.
which is fantastic. That's very powerful marketing. So, and that's why I've always stuck with the brand. And I'm not saying it has to be Remax. I'm saying if you're aligned with a top brand, leverage the brand, keep the colors, stay true to the brand. Don't put pink and yellow signs out there. And no offense to anybody who does have pink and yellow signs, but just stick with the basics because it works. And hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent in investing in the brand. So leverage that. And that's part of an investment as well.
Well said. And Tanya, for you, you mentioned with REMAX throughout your entire career. What's made you stay?
Well, gosh, I mean, when I started, I wanted to be the best, and so Remax was the best at the time. And when I say the best, I just mean they had a lot of the top agents in the city that were doing the majority of the volume, and I hadn't sold a shoe, let alone a home. I was a university dropout, a rural country kid. And so I was so naive. Like, it's interesting, Faisal, what you said about, wow, this big brand. I was just so young and naive. I was like, well, okay, who's doing the most business? Who has the best realtors? And I just walked in and I was like, will you hire me? Not realizing that they're also making income off of me. And I was just like, okay, that sounds good. I don't think I even interviewed another brokerage. And I was like, I get to learn from some of the best people in the industry. And then I really used the brand to leverage myself because I couldn't sell myself on experience, but I could sell myself on, I work for the number one REMAX brokerage based on gross sales volume in the world. And people are like, wow, and so I really leveraged that brokerage for so many years. And then when I started seeing some success, there was no reason to leave. And there is no reason for me to leave. I believe that there are different types of brokerages out there. I look at Remax as Chanel. Chanel is a great product, and there's other great products out there. There's Arbonne. Arbonne's a great product. It's just a different business model. So I think that there's lots of great options out there, but I always say to people, Remax is where I started and Remax is where I'll end. I'll never leave.
And then Chris, for you, coming off your tenure as REMAX Canada president, I'm sure that you have some thoughts around this as well.
Well, first of all, it's a family business. My grandfather was one of the founders in Canada. But everything the brand stands for in an industry that, unfortunately is awash in predominantly unproductive and non-productive agents. It's really, for me, it's very proud to be associated with a brand that was built by and for the real estate professional. And, it's never wavered from that. It's always been geared to the agent that wants to make this business a career or make a career out of the business, not for part-timers. And yeah, it's a big pride thing for me to be associated with an organization that is so closely tied with professionalism, high standards, ethics, and all the things that a lot of consumers look for when they're making probably the biggest purchase of their lifetime.
And we have some questions coming in between the chat and the Q&A. So we'll just have Chris keep going with the first question, which is between commercial and residential, which do you prefer and why?
Um, it depends because they both have pros and cons. Depending on where you live, residential can be great because oftentimes you have long-term tenants, depending on the price point you're in and the type of unit, of course, but you get a little more predictability, whereas in commercial, you can have businesses that rent from you and fail, but you get a lot more control in commercial. So, for example, in Ontario, you could be held up for eons with a residential tenant that isn't paying, where in commercial, you have the option to lock them out after a couple of weeks in a lot of cases. And so both have pros and cons. I think residential is a bit more mindless and but commercial more control. So 50-50.
Right down the middle.
Yeah.
And Faisal, how about you?
I agree with Chris on what he said. I think when you're starting out, it's like use the residential investment to build up your portfolio. And when you see the commercial opportunities, I think I bought my first, other than the one I had to partner with, but I bought my first commercial property in 2007. And I bought the land, built the plaza, and then started that. And I do love commercial if you have the right anchor tenants in there that can carry it, that they've got a good covenant, they're a proven type of model, and like to Chris's point, you don't want vacancies. What I love about commercial is it's net, net, net. So you're not paying for the property taxes and the insurance and the maintenance. It's all passed down to the tenant. Whereas in commercial, in residential, if the turkey's not cooking properly on Christmas Eve, you're getting the call and you're dealing with that. Whereas you don't have to worry about it in commercial.
Yeah. And how about you, Tanya? Like, especially with Alberta, with regulations around residential being a lot kind of more in favor of the landlord than it might be in Ontario. How do you feel with the same question?
Well, so myself personally, I'm not invested in any commercial real estate. I'm only in residential. And I had an opportunity probably in about 2009 to do a joint venture in a commercial business. And I ended up doing a VC deal instead. And that was kind of my soiree into more VC. So I just took a different kind of route. So I can't speak to the commercial side of the investment because I'm only in residential.
Good. Then we have another question here coming in. We'll keep it going with you, Tanya, for this one. And the question is, I'm over 65. Is it too late to start investing in real estate?
Never. It's never too late because I think it's about the legacy that you want to leave for your family as well. And I think that it's if you have the ability to invest, it's passive income. So it is, I believe, about the buy, not about the sell. And I think that there's a lot of great markets to, especially, I think there's going to be especially upcoming in Canada to get into real estate. And so I believe that there is not too late. I believe, though, that it's important that you don't over leverage yourself. So, instead of maybe putting 5 or 10% down, put 30 or 40% down and get your money working with you for you to get some positive cash flow, to have some passive income. And then the rest is just your legacy and what you can leave to your family.
And Chris, do you have anything to add on the when to start?
As soon as you can, while it's within your means. And so I can't tell you how many stories I heard people buying in 2020 and 2021, peak market conditions, 5% down, and it's crushed them because they couldn't carry it. Tenants moved out. And so do the math on what your income is, what you can your expenditure, put a safety net aside as well. And as soon as you can make that work and potentially have to carry a place for 6 to 12 months, 6 months, 12 months is a bit conservative, but um, being able to do the math on what weathering a potential storm is super important. So as soon as you can make that work, I would say dive in.
And Faisal, what do you feel about the is it too late for someone to start question?
So I have an active investor right now who's 78 years old, and he's still buying properties. And he has one rule and he's building this up for the next generation, and he has one rule, and it's actually in his will that his children are not allowed to sell these properties unless there's like massive disaster in their family and they have executors and people overseeing it. Because he's realized over his investment journey, which has always been with me over the past 30 years, that and he was just working as a maintenance person, and the amount of wealth he's been able to create, and he doesn't want his kids to spend that money on foolish things. So to the person who asked it at 65, you're still a baby. So get investing now.
We have another question here from Jakey. What are you doing for the existing portfolio for residential property? Are you holding, selling, and what time frame for both? Let me start with you, Faisal. Keep it going.
My existing portfolio, I am holding, I am adding, I am leveraging, I continuously build. One of the rules that I have is never sell your assets. So I'm not a flipper, I am an accumulator, leveraging whatever I've had. Now I'm at the point in my career and life where I want to see that stuff starting to pay down significantly so I can replace my day-to-day income, not that I'm ever going to retire, but my day-to-day income by my passive income. So leveraging your assets right now is good. And like I said earlier, building your portfolio in a down market is always favorable.
How about you, Tanya? What are you doing?
Yeah, I do believe similar to Faisal in buy and hold. And someday when my husband and I retire, I'd like to have my real estate portfolio as part of my passive income. That being said, I have sold a couple of properties throughout, say, the 15 years that I've had real estate, specifically to help me buy maybe properties that would have been a better investment than the ones that I owned, sorry. And so I have sold some properties to get into some bigger investments because I needed more cash to do so. So I leveraged those properties that had a lot of equity in them. But typically I do a buy and hold.
And how are you, Chris? Are you buying and holding, or are you moving around more?
I don't know, Faisal, am I selling?
Oh,
I've called him a couple of times. There was one unit where, the tenants moved out a bunch of times and he's always talked me off the ledge. But yeah, right now, and the real estate side for sure, holding. On the stock side, it's so hard to predict. But I'm looking at a lot of different business opportunities too. And so, I'll probably be buying by the end of this year.
All right, we're coming up close to the end of the hour, but I want to end on one of my favorite questions to ask, and that is if you could go back to day one. So, given all the information, all of the experiences, everything you've learned now, if you could go back to day one and do something differently, what would you do differently? Faisal, I'll start with you for that.
I would have looked at this business as a business earlier on. I would have started investing in marketing earlier on. It took me some time to realize that, we are very fortunate. We have billions of dollars of inventory for free that we have the ability to go out and sell without actually having to buy that inventory like a car lot and put it on your lot and pay interest on that. So where your overhead should be your marketing. Your overhead should be your system and making that so efficient. So my entire career has been based on making sure that I'm top of mind, especially in my city, by getting in front of people in their mailboxes, on the buses, on the benches, on the billboards, and adapting really sort of the REMAX strategy of be everywhere, top of mind on the hockey arenas, wherever you are, so that people remember you, because that's your investment in your business, and that's what makes the phone ring, and that's what gives you a very lucrative career.
Love that advice. Tanya, your thoughts? If you could go back to day one, what would you do differently?
Kind of similar to Faisal, maybe a little bit different response, but because I started so young, I had very little life experience. And so I think people would sell me very easily, like, oh, well, have you tried this type of marketing, or have you tried this type of marketing? And I've spent tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars on wasted marketing, not maybe doing enough due diligence or asking enough questions. And so what I figured out later on is what the type of realtor that I am. And what I mean by that is there's lots of ways that realtors make money. And not, when I say this, not one is right or wrong. My growth has been very organic in 25 years, where there's some really successful agents in my market that have spent hundreds of thousands on lead generation and engines and websites, and they're very successful. I have a lot of respect for their businesses. But what I tried, spending thousands of dollars on lead generation, I realized that that's not who I am. I specialize in the inner city luxury market, and that is my market, and that's okay. You can't be all things to all people. Now, do I do bus benches and billboards and just listed cards and magazines? Yes, but I do it to more a specific market. And so if I could say to my old self, is ask questions, find out the market that you really want to specialize in, and what type of agent you want to be, commercial, residential.
Love that. And Chris, for you, same question. Going back to the early stages of the career, given the knowledge you have now, how would you approach things differently?
Well, you mentioned at the start, like starting sooner, and looking for opportunities. I'll share a quick story. Um, my mom would always say, when I was out being a regional director, I was always looking or asking the brokers, how's recruiting going? How are the agents in your office? Whereas our partner in the business was always asking, where's the best opportunity in this town? And so it was a bit of a different approach, and I think at the end of the day, we're working with people day in, day out that are looking at real estate. Most of the time, they're looking for a property for their families. And do they buy every single property that they see? No. And so you're going into these properties, you're seeing what the pros and cons are, you can run the math. And I guess what I'm trying to say is because you're a realtor, you have access to so much information that can help you make really good and smart decisions. And don't waste that, because it's gold.
Love that. A ton of value shared in this hour conversation. Andrew, I know I have a disclaimer to read one more time in a little bit, but do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming, from everyone who's attended. We've had a pretty good rate of everyone sticking around, which is always nice. I know sometimes this time of year, people can get pulled in different directions. So I appreciate you guys taking the time. I appreciate panelists for coming on and sharing. That was great. And REMAX for partnering with us here at REM, just to kind of bring everything together and organizing, having great people on, because it's always more fun to learn from people instead of just like one person sharing slides. It's just way more interesting that way. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you for Wade for help with co-hosting, and I mean, it's just generally very thankful.
That's right. That's right. And one final quick disclaimer. I imagine the attendance might drop off at this point in time, but I'll read this quickly. The content of this webinar and the views and opinions expressed by the participants and others are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position or policy of REMAX Canada or its affiliates. This webinar is for informational purposes only and not intended to and does not supplement the content of any franchise disclosure document that has been provided to you. As a reminder, the content, that's it. That's it. That's the full disclaimer.
Nailed
I got
it.
through it quicker this time. Thank you, Faisal, Tanya, Chris, and Andrew. Such a great conversation today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.